Good morning, readers. Today is launch day for They Sought Vengeance, book number 14 in the Zachary Goldman Mysteries series. So if you like gritty private investigator series, then this is the one for you. And as usual, I'm going to read a little excerpt from chapter 1 of the book, and you can see what you think about it. The No Grounds for Alarm cafe was quiet. The morning rush was over, and most of the staff were wiping down counters and chatting idly with each other, taking the time to restock and get ready for the lunch rush. Sun streamed in the front window. A few customers trickled in, ordered their beverages, and either wandered back out of the cafe with blank expressions on their faces, or sought out a table and sat down with a computer or other device to work on something important, or to check out their social media feeds. Zachary had arrived before the appointed time to check out the location and ensure he wasn't late for the appointment. If there was one way to lose a new client, it was by being late. It didn't matter what the reason was, it could be perfectly legitimate. The client would go somewhere else. So he sipped his coffee and watched the customers trickle in, speculating which would be Karen Camden. He had a picture in his mind after hearing her voice, but had not run any background on her. He wanted his impressions to be of her in person, not on social media, in news articles, or wherever else he might find records of her life. She hadn't had a lot to say on the phone. She hadn't been referred by a friend, but had heard his name in the media on one of his other cases, though she didn't specify which one. A few of them had made the news. Zachary was always a little leery of the potential clients who had seen him in the media. They tended to have unrealistic expectations of what he could or would do, and somehow those people didn't seem to understand that they would be expected to pay an upfront deposit, and that he would be paid for all his work, whether he came to the resolution they wanted or not. People who approached him because of a business listing or as a referral from another client were much more realistic and likely to pay their bills. A woman stepped in the door and looked around the coffee shop rather than immediately going to the service counter. She was slim, probably in her mid-20s to early 30s, dark brown hair and blue or gray eyes. She had an attractive face, but was made up in a very plain style, her hair pulled back in a no-fuss ponytail that made her seem severe. The woman wore a dark green skirt, a white short-sleeved blouse, and black flats. Zachary smiled and raised his hand slightly. She walked over to the table. "Mr. Goldman?" "Zachary." He stood up and offered his hand, which she shook firmly. She had long, tapered fingers and dry, warm hands. Her perfume was a combination of light florals with a hint of citrus. "Nice to meet you, Miss Camden." "It's Mrs., but you can call me Karen." She wore no wedding ring, no jewelry except for the gold chain around her neck that disappeared into her blouse and might have a locket, stone, or charm on it. Zachary ran his hand over his own very short black hair, aware that she was also evaluating him. He had shaved for the meeting, but usually had a few days' stubble, which tended to make people look away and discount him. For once, he didn't look too gaunt. The cocktail of medications he was on no longer included drugs that made him nauseated. Kenzie didn't let him forget to eat, and they indulged in a few too many restaurant meals, leading to her working hard to keep from putting the pounds on, and Zachary filling out and reaching what his doctor considered a healthy weight for once. Introductions and initial evaluations out of the way, Zachary suggested, "Why don't you grab a coffee, and then we can get down to it?" She nodded her agreement and went over to the counter. She glanced at the densely written blackboard only briefly, and had either been there before or knew the menu, or already knew what she wanted. What she brought back to the table looked like the Café Noir, plain black coffee, not one of the fancy calorie-laden varieties that covered the board. Karen pulled out a chair for herself and sat down. She wrapped both hands around the coffee mug as if she were warming her hands, and stared down at the black shimmering surface. Zachary waited, having a sip of his own Café Noir. It was often difficult for clients to bring their troubles to a stranger. Jumping right in and explaining what they needed was a big step. There might be small talk first, questions about Zachary's background and references, fishing to find out his knowledge on various topics or situations, while they weighed his words to see whether he was really the right man for the job, or if they even wanted to hire anyone. Sometimes it was just too much, but usually, given a period of silence, each would speak up and tell him a bit of their story. My father recently passed away, Karen said eventually, not yet looking up from her coffee. It was unexpected. The police looked into it, but said it was a natural death. He had some health conditions. Her shoulders rose and fell. The coroner said it was heart failure. He had cardiovascular disease. But it wasn't expected, she reiterated, and we think there's more to this story. It was too sudden, and there was no warning. Zachary nodded. It can be difficult when someone passes away so suddenly. Karen grimaced. She took a sip of her coffee and put the cup down again. You think that we're just imagining things because it was unexpected, but there's more to it than that. We? Who else is concerned about it? My brothers and I. There are 4 of us altogether, 3 boys and a girl. And the others think that something is wrong too. It isn't just me. We keep going back and forth on it, and we finally decided to hire someone independent to look into it. So the 4 of you think what? Karen sighed. She looked out the window at the people walking by on the sidewalk. We think he was poisoned. That seemed oddly specific, but maybe something about his death had led them to think that it was poisoning. You think he was murdered? Yes, she nodded, one jerk of her head. I guess, yes, that's what we think, or what we are hoping you can prove or disprove. It might be hard to prove or disprove. There are hundreds of poisons that could have been used. Who do you think killed him? You have a suspect in mind? Maybe her mother, or a business partner, or a rival of her father. When people came to Zachary, they often had already built up the story in their minds. And despite the preponderance of murder mysteries on TV and in books, murders were usually obvious and the killer easy to identify. If they thought they knew who the killer was, they were probably right. Maybe the mother, since they had all met together to discuss it and agreed to hire someone. Well, one of us, probably, Karen said. A blush started at the base of her throat and chest. You or your brothers? Zachary wasn't sure he'd understood her correctly. Yes, we're clearly the ones who benefit from his death. None of us were close to him. I know it's probably weird, but we're all looking at each other, wondering which one of us did it. So you decided to hire a private investigator to investigate you? Yes, the 4 of us, she shrugged. I mean, we're not going to figure it out by arguing with each other. If one of us did it, then that person should go to prison. We might not have been close to him, but it's still not right. We can't just divide up the inheritance and give a quarter of it to the killer. Better that a third of it should go to each of the non-killers. Is the estate significant? She nodded, jaw clenched tight. Yes, it's millions. All right, so that is a preview of She Wore Mourning, today's new release. And I'm just going to jump ahead here. All right, so I hope that you will have a chance to pick that up and get started on it today. And if you're looking to catch up on the series, then there are a couple of collections that you can get to read up on the others on the series as well. But of course, it can be read as a standalone book. So if you haven't read the rest of the series, you're still okay to read it. And as well, don't forget that I have launched my subscriptions. So if you want to get my new release each month without having to do anything but check your email box, you can do that. There are also options if you want to be part of my VIP readers group, or if you want to get early access to each new book, and also to my back catalog. So you can check all of those options out at pdworkman.com and pop over and pick up She Wore Vengeance today.